Go ahead and take a look at Novolab Mission 2. So here, looking at dinosaurs, looking at these organisms here, I want to try to find my outlier. I know a little bit about this, so I don't need to use the magnifying glass here. I know that this is a Archaeopteryx was a dinosaur that had feathers, so I'm going to say he's probably more close related to birds here. Then we have a T-Rex and an Albertosaurus. It's hard to determine who my outgroup here is unless I actually do more detail. So I'm going to say Albertosaurus, followed by T-Rex, Archaeopteryx, ostrich, and chicken. So if you use a magnifying glass, you might come to the same conclusions as this. Looking at this, I'm going to say that these two, because they even look so similar through morphology, that they're probably more closely related, so I'm going to group them together like that. Okay? So looking at the most distant common ancestor for all of these guys, here we have a speciation event. What did this ancestor have that because it had it, everything past it, past this branching event, any species that came after would also have it? I'm going to say wishbone. Okay. Next, taking a look at these guys here versus these guys, it says two-fingered hand, shafted feathers, toothless beak. Now, I know these guys don't have shafted feathers or toothless beaks, so I'm going to look here and think probably two-fingered hand would go with these guys. And that works. Okay. So after this speciation event and the branching occurred here, this ancestor evolved two-fingered hands. So any individual past that point is going to have two-fingered hands going down this branching event here. Off to the right, what do Archaeopteryx, the ostrich, and the chicken all have in common? I'm going to say shafted feathers because they all had feathers here. And that is correct. So after this speciation event, after this branching occurred, there was a mutation or there was something that caused evolution here where shafted feathers developed. So from this ancestor on, anything past this point would have shafted feathers. After the speciation event, going over to this side here, there was a branching to develop ostrich and chicken. What did this common ancestor have in common that passed on to both of these and why both of them have it in common? That would be the toothless beak. Alright, so after solving the puzzle, do birds have anything in common with ancestors? Absolutely. So they are believed to be descendants of dinosaurs. Right? Taking a look at fish. So the evolution of fish to land animals here. Again, if you use your magnifying glass, it can help you get some information about these guys. So I'm going to say the outlier, the one that looks less like a land capable animal, would be this guy here, followed by say this one, this guy, and this guy here. Okay. So taking a look, actually I'm going to switch these guys here. Alright, so what do all of these have in common? Oh, looks like I was actually right the other way. So that goes there, put that guy there. Alright, so looking at all of these, again, this is their distant common ancestor. What did that common ancestor have? What trait that every single individual past that wound up having because that common ancestor had it? I'm going to say strong arm-like bones. And that is correct. Okay, so past that speciation event, branched off and formed these guys here. This branch will lead to all these guys here. So right here we have another speciation and branching event. What trait did this common ancestor have that every individual after it had? I'm going to say eyes on top of their head. And that is correct. And then finally going over here to these guys, we have one thing left. So after this speciation event, this branch off here created this species, and going this way, there was evolution that occurred toward digits appeared. So this common ancestor had digits, so any individual that came after it also had digits there. So according to the tree just built, what is the first trait that helped aquatic species evolve into the creatures that live on land? Strong arm-like bones. That's what they had in common here. All right, finally the origin of whales. Okay, so taking a look here, we should definitely have an outlier. So the hippo seems like the outlier here, the outgroup. So I'm putting it as my outgroup. And then I'm going to look at and see these organisms and see how they change to evolve into whales here. So I'm going to say this guy evolved next, followed by this one. This is extinct, and these guys are still living, so I'm going to say these guys were more distant in the past. And then we go to the blue whale, I'm going to say. Finally, the killer whale. Okay. All right, so it looks like I was right about the hippo being the outlier, the outgroup here, because it only has one thing that shares with all the rest of them here. So way down here, this common ancestor, what traits did it have that it passed on to everything past this point? So carnivorous diet, gills, living in seawater, loss of external hind limbs, tail flukes, and underwater nursing. Well, I know hippos do underwater nursing, and I'm gonna guess that these guys do too, so let's see if that works. And that is correct. So even these organisms that appear to be clearly like land animals here, they actually had underwater nursing. Okay? So after this branching event, every organism past this ancestor will have underwater nursing. And then evolution occurs and changes this lineage here and this lineage off this way. So something happens to where this common ancestor is going to develop a trait that all of these guys have in common. So taking a look here, I know they don't have gills, so I could cross that out completely because these are not fish. So definitely not gills. These guys are all mammals here. I would say carnivorous diet. Okay, so from this point on, they developed into carnivores. So this common ancestor was a carnivore, and so every individual after that was a carnivore. Again, this branches off and forms these guys here. This branch will lead to these guys here. So here, what do all of these guys have in common that this common ancestor had before they branched off? So because this common ancestor had those traits, it passed it on to the rest. So let's say living in seawater. Correct. So this organism that appears to be a land organism actually did live in seawater here. And then looking at these, loss of external hind limbs and tail flukes. Well, I see a tail fluke there, there, and there, so I'm going to say that's the next trait that developed. So after this branching, this guy did not. So the common ancestor did not have tail flukes. But from this point on, at some point in evolution, tail flukes evolved. So we see that in these guys here. So this common ancestor had tail flukes. And then looking at the last thing, so tail flukes we see here, loss of external hind limbs. So this common ancestor had hind limbs. But after this branching, on this branch here, hind limbs remained. This branching, there was a loss of hind limbs. And so that's what we see in our blue whale and our killer whales today. All right, so which of the following species does not have a tail fluke? And that's the Pakicetus here. And that is correct. And that's it for mission 2.